Hello, everyone. Welcome to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers.
And I'm Bob Sellers. Thanks for joining us here. Well, the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, is underway in Orlando, Florida. We've been watching it since it started this morning. We've had various speakers, including Marsha Blackburn, my former senator in Tennessee. And right now, political analyst Mark Halperin is on the ground right now with that aforementioned senator. And we want to check in with Mark. Mark.
Bob, Heather, welcome back to Orlando. As you said, Marsha Blackburn, the senior senator from Tennessee, just finished speaking, and she's nice enough to stop to talk to us now. Senator, welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. What a great day in Orlando.
Tell me why you like CPAC so much. Why do you choose to come spend your time here as opposed to other places you could go?
I'm telling you, friends, fellow conservatives, a lot of happy warriors. And this year, people are saying, hey, you know what? We have got to stand up for our freedoms. I think they have really been a little bit surprised by how aggressive the Democrats have pushed this socialist left-leaning agenda, and they're ready to fight back.
So in the world, you can sit and describe problems and bemoan them, or you can try to solve them. How do you propose to solve the problem with big tech, corporate media, universities? How would you propose to people to solve the problem, not just of cancel culture, but of cultural domination by left institutions?
Well, and see, you have to realize China is intent on global dominance. So it is up to us. One of the starting spots is my virtual you protection agenda. What it would do is give you, the individual, the toolbox to go in and say, big tech, you cannot follow me, listen to me, you can't use my data unless you get explicit permission and I say you can share or sell my data. The next is censorship, dealing with Section 230, taking away those protections, the liability protections from big tech, and giving them to little tech, new entrants, and saying to big tech, you cannot censor anyone unless you meet these very narrowly defined provisions. And guess what? You can't knock them off your platform. The other is data security. If somebody has a data breach, if they have had that handle, they have to give you notice within about 72 hours, not wait 2 weeks or 2 years to tell you.
Those are ways to deal with the current power of these organizations.
That's right.
Attempts to build conservative power analog organizations hasn't succeeded. Parler has tried, it got knocked off. Is there a way to build conservative universities, conservative news organizations like NewsMax that don't get challenged for their place in the world? Is that possible?
Oh, yes, I think it is possible. And the first thing you do is reconfigure that marketplace. Because if big tech has to get your permission, that deals with the number of eyeballs that they have. That affects their ad rate. If we change the language in Section 230 and they can't hide behind those protections, that creates a more level playing field. Plus, it gives those protections to new entrants in the marketplace so they can grow up and be big tech. But that is how you begin to put in some diversity into the system.
I want to ask you about two foreign policy, national security issues that are in the news and see where you stand on them. The strike on Syria by the Biden administration to maybe to send a message to Syria and Iran. Is that kind of strike something you support on a bipartisan basis, knowing we don't know all the facts right now?
You know, we don't have all the facts. That is something I think we'll know a little bit more, and we should get a briefing on that early next week.
But are those kinds of strikes in general, do you think the kind of thing, a good use of executive power, a good use of American power?
I think what we want to do is learn a little bit more about that strike and the reasoning and the underpinning of that.
A report out today about the murder of a Washington Post journalist by the Saudis and blame being put on the Saudi family, the royal family. Are you comfortable with what seems to be a pretty aggressive effort by the Biden administration to change the terms of our relationship with Saudi Arabia?
One of the things that is of concern to me is that the Saudis moved forward with this. I think that everyone was a little bit stunned by that. Here is the thing. People knew where President Trump stood. They may not agree with him, but they always knew where he stood. And I think what you're seeing are challenges that are going to come to the Biden administration. And whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it is China, whether it is some other country. So we know that those are going to come, and they're all just really very difficult and many times regrettable situations.
Senator, last question, one sentence if you could. Is the future of the Republican Party tied up with Donald Trump in a positive way or in a negative way?
The future of the Republican Party, Donald Trump is going to be a very important voice as we move forward. And with so much overreach by the Biden administration, you're seeing people more united now than they have been in really quite a long time.
Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Senator, thank you for joining us here at CPAC. Bob and Heather, we'll have more with you in just a few minutes, I think. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
Okay, yes, we'll get back to you in just a few. Thank you very much, Mark. Meanwhile, as they were talking about President Biden ordering airstrikes on buildings in Syria that the Pentagon said were used by Iranian-backed militias. The airstrikes killed at least 22 people and were reportedly carried out in retaliation for rocket attacks on U.S. targets in Iraq. Let's check in with our White House correspondent, Emerald Robinson, for the latest out of Washington, D.C. Emerald.
Hi, Bob. Good to see you. Yes, there are still a lot of questions about this strike. We're waiting to get answered. There has been a Pentagon briefing. There has also been a gaggle with Press Secretary Jen Psaki about this response to the rocket launch on February 15th that did kill one coalition contractor and injured several others. But look, this is a big change striking Syria. It happened at 6 p.m. Striking Iranian-backed militias in Syria. That happened at 6 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday. It's a big departure from what many members of this administration has had to say in the past about what the Trump administration did in regards to strikes in Syria. In fact, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki herself tweeted in 2017 after the first Trump administration strike. She said, also, what is the legal authority for strikes? Assad is a brutal dictator, but Syria is a sovereign country. Now, she was asked about that today, that tweet, not necessarily if the sovereignty of Syria, but she was asked about that tweet on Air Force One today, and she suggested that the strike by the Biden administration was a proportional response to the rocket launch into Iraq. Now, also, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, weighed in 2018 on the second strike in Syria by the Trump administration. She said, quote, for the president of this action, she said, quote, I strongly support our men and women in uniform and believe we must hold Assad accountable for his unconscionable use of chemical weapons. But I am deeply concerned about the legal rationale of last night's strikes. The president needs to lay out a comprehensive strategy in Syria in consultation with Congress, and he needs to do it now. Joe Biden, the current president in 2019, was also critical of President Trump when he thought about striking Iran, but backed off of that in regards to Iran doing a drone strike on a U.S. drone. But look, here's what it boils down to is what is the strategy from this administration on Iran? That was not answers that we got from the press secretary yet, or really from the Pentagon yet. There's some questions about how really successful the strike was, in that Joe Biden has been seen recently on being very soft on Iran, looking to remove sanctions that were imposed under the Trump administration, trying to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. Those are still questions that they have. So this is a developing situation. Bob, Heather.
Yeah, and those things all going on at the same time. We're going to talk a little bit more about all that and the political implications coming up a little bit later. Thank you so much, Emerald. But in the meantime, let's check back in with our political analyst, Mark Halpern, who is on the ground at CPAC in Orlando. You know, Mark, we've been watching these speeches all morning long. Tell us about the level of excitement there this year.
You know, it's a very typical CPAC, Heather, even though it's scaled back, even though it's not in the Washington, D.C. area where it's traditionally been. This is a group of people who are excited about Donald Trump's appearance Sunday, excited to see people like Marsha Blackburn, Ted Cruz, Tom Cotton, and excited to be able to talk to other conservatives from around the country. This is kind of like a state fair that's a national state fair, a policy conversation, and again, a lot of networking. It is interesting always to see how news is digested. Lots of talk here about the Syrian strike. Lots of talk here about what's going on with Saudi Arabia, with China. People here are very engaged on the issues. And I think you heard Senator Blackburn say something I've heard from others, which is they want to see a strategy from Joe Biden, not just tactics, like a strike, but a strategy that relates to how he's going to deal with these thorny foreign policy issues. That is a big theme you're hearing here from a lot of the speakers, along with this issue of liberty and the question of, can conservatives function in an American society where many of the major institutions are tilted heavily to the left?
All right, we will continue to check in with you, Mark, and we also want folks to know we are going to be taking some of the other speeches as the afternoon goes on. Thank you, Mark. We'll get back in a second. We are also waiting on the speech from Donald Trump Jr., as well as Senator Rick Scott, Florida senator, of course, and we'll have more on American Agenda after we take a break.
And welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Heather Childers, along with Bob Sellers. We're continuing our coverage of CPAC, which is underway in Orlando, Florida right now. Let's listen in to Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Technology companies ultimately get the power and the government all at once. There are no checks and balances when they can control, alt, delete anyone for any reason. Now, in China, this means that the government assigns people a social credit score, where you live, where your children go to school, professional opportunities, access to government programs. It all depends on what government and tech think of you. Just look at what's happening in the Biden administration today, a revolving door with Twitter, Facebook, Google, Amazon executives rolling into the government to create a unified system. And maybe we would feel better if government was getting big tech's brightest. Sadly, we're not. Listen to how things have changed. Prior to social media in Silicon Valley, the most significant investor and customer was the Department of Defense. Our best minds worked on bombs and radar and stealth, often in partnership with DARPA. Jeff Bezos' grandfather was actually the number 4 person at DARPA. But as commerce moved online, the incentives for focused digital talent moved too. Today, America's sharpest minds are focused on memes, not munitions, likes, not lasers, ratios, not robotics, and hyperviral, not hypersonic. So are these social networks really making us stronger, safer? Or do they just further addict us to our vices? Instagram for vanity, Twitter for wrath, Uber Eats for gluttony, and Tinder for lust. We need a renewed patriotic nationalism in America. In technology, that means let's get our best team together and go whip China. And in politics, it means let's get our best team together and go whip the establishment. Speaking of people who ought to lose primaries, if Liz Cheney were on this stage today, she'd get booed off of it.
Well, you didn't hear that, but I think that was kind of interesting. If Liz Cheney was there, suggesting she'd be booed. And the part of that, what she said a couple days ago, questioning whether the president, former president, should be there and what he should talk about. So I think he knows the audience there at CPAC, and I know who else knows the audience, and that is the host of the Howie Carr Show, Howie Carr himself. So, Howie, from what you've seen, you're down there in Florida. I don't know if you plan on going there this weekend, but give me your feel for what's going on.
Well, I think you just saw that Matt Gaetz got a lot bigger round of applause, and there was a lot more excitement when he was throwing them some red meat about Liz Cheney rather than these sort of abstract intellectual arguments about Silicon Valley and China. I think that's what the people go there for. They go there for the red meat, and you saw this morning it was kind of like an early sort of spring training for the 2024 candidates. If President Trump doesn't run, you had Ted Cruz, you had Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Obviously, Ted Cruz has had a worse week or so than Ron DeSantis. Not that it's anything fatal to his chances in 2024, but I think everybody is going to be looking forward just to what the president says. And you know, he's certainly got a lot of material to work with this last week or so. You know, I told you so. That could be the you know, the theme of his speech. You know, higher gas prices, violence returning in the Mid-East with the Iranians, you know, running out of control or starting to run out of control. Joe Biden even having to back off on the minimum wage, the Equality Act. He could certainly get some material out of the horrible act that was passed in the House last night. I mean, there's just so much for him to work with, and again, he's got to keep it kind of light because it's a convention. I mean, people like to to have you put it in very blunt campaign-style rally terms. But that's his specialty. I'm sure he'll do a great job.
Yeah, a lot of people actually who aren't even there, who will be watching across the country, looking for that rally feeling again that they've been missing. And what they're talking specifically about right now has to do with government, big tech, media. They're calling it, saying that they're all colluding to deprive us of our humanity. So obviously censorship, as you mentioned, would be a big topic for the president as well. Are there any topics you think he should not hit on?
Well, I probably not talk about the lost election. You know, there's an old saying in Hollywood: self-pity is not good box office. It's probably just as well just to, maybe make one reference. You know, we all know what happened on, in November, and just leave it at that, and kind of look to the future. I think he's in a much better humor. We don't see his tweets now, obviously, because he's off Twitter. But I think he's looking better. I think he's lost some weight. He seems to be in a pretty good frame of mind down here in Florida. And, he liked going out on President's Day and, waving to the crowd. I think he'll be in pretty good form on Sunday, if I had to guess. And I don't think I think you're going to see the lighter side rather than the darker side of Donald Trump.
So you're saying he's tan, rested, and ready. So that's where we're going. All right. As you look like you're all of the above as well. We hate to cut it off there, Howie. We do want to go back. Charlie Kirk speaking at CPAC. Let's listen in.
Family, an absolute gift to our country, Rush Limbaugh. Rush was a fighter for free speech. We talk a lot about free speech. We talk about the importance of the First Amendment. However, sometimes we as conservatives stop short of protecting freedom of speech where it matters most. So I'm going to ask you a question. Which is more powerful, Google or our federal government? Now, we as conservatives are taught to answer that question automatically by saying the federal government. Now, I'm not doubting that the federal government has power. The federal government can imprison people. They can audit you. They have the power of the law. However, if that were to happen, you at least get some due process rights. You're supposed to get representation by an attorney. You're able to sue your government if they do something illegal to you. What happens if Google comes after you? What happens if Google decides to digitally assassinate a certain person, like what we saw happen last month? They can wipe away the existence of an idea, of a human being, of a political movement instantaneously. So I understand lots of conservatives are hesitant to talk about challenging big tech, hesitant about challenging Menlo Park and Silicon Valley. But we as conservatives should not become corporatists. We as conservatives should ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a conservative? First and foremost, we are here to conserve God-given liberties and freedoms. We are here to protect the family, our country, the American way of life. And when a group of people in a concentrated area controlling trillion-dollar companies decide to impose a viewpoint that is completely contrary to the American way of life, and then we say, well, we can't do anything because they're a private company. Excuse me, as soon as you have 200 million users and 93% of all search results, you're not the local flower shop or the local coffee shop, and you shouldn't be treated as such. And we as conservatives must be very clear. If you do not support breaking up big tech or challenging big tech, you are not a conservative, you are a corporatist. You see, the Founding Fathers were very worried about the centralization of power. I love limited government. But why do we love limited government? We love it so that we can live lives as we see fit. The Founding Fathers loved liberty. They believed liberty was given to us by God, not by government. But the Founding Fathers never imagined that a small collection of companies could potentially be more powerful than our own government. Google is more powerful than our government, and there is no check and balance against them. People say, start a competitor. Well, then they'll wipe you out like they did to Parler. People say, well, what harm has Google actually done to the country? Well, besides addicting our children to their smartphones all day long and destroying the humanity of an entire generation, besides censoring different political opinions, even beyond that, they have the potential power to obliterate any political movement. We saw it with one of the most grotesque and dangerous.
Just a little bit for you there from Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA. He's actually wrapping up this series of speakers talking about the left's assault on free speech and free people involving big tech, big government, big media. And then Charlie Kirk's topic was just all-encompassing big control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, Mark Halperin has Tom Cotton as a guest, so we look forward to seeing that. Stay with us. More coming from here on American Agenda, as well as from CPAC down in Orlando. Hey, folks, welcome back to American Agenda. I'm Bob Sellers here with Heather Childers. Let's go back down to Orlando. Mark Halperin standing by with Senator Tom Cotton. Mark.
Bob, Heather, thank you. It's not true that every third person you pass at CPAC is a United States Senator. It just seems that way. So here we are with Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Mark, thanks for having me on.
I want to ask you about a couple things you talked about in your speech. First, immigration. I think you probably agree that what the Biden administration is proposing is to the left of what Barack Obama did. Is that accurate?
Oh, yeah. It's the most left-wing radical immigration agenda ever proposed by a president. I mean, just look at what's happening at our southern border right now. We're having a surge of migrants, including unaccompanied children, in February, right after a deep freezing winter storm. Imagine what it's going to be like in 60 days if we don't reverse these policies.
So they're proposing something very liberal. They're not making as big an effort on deportations or on the border as compared to the Obama administration. And the facts on the ground seem like they're going to get worse. So when does this give?
Well, I think you're already starting to see it give. Look at the public opinion polls. The least popular thing Joe Biden has done so far is reverse Donald Trump's immigration policy. The facts of the ground are bad now. They're going to get worse. And I even hear in Congress a lot of Democrats wanting to pump the brakes on the open borders, amnesty, mass migration bill that the president sent last week. So I think the Democrats recognize that this is already a political vulnerability for them. And the reason it's a political vulnerability for them is a very bad policy for the American people.
One of the pieces you mentioned there is his proposed solution, a path to citizenship, not legal status, but citizenship for the 12 million or so who entered the country illegally. I ask every Republican this question. What is your solution to that? Is there something there you could do with the Biden administration to reach a compromise on that big issue?
Well, first, Mark, we don't have to take one step or the other. We don't have to say we're going to deport all 15 or 20 million or we're going to give them all legal status. We can address the problems that created, or the situation that created that problem in the first place, like securing our southern border, like updating our visa system, like mandating the employment verification system to be used by all employers. The reason why we have 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants in the country now is that we tried to do this in 1986. We tried amnesty first, enforcement later, which became enforcement never. So it didn't solve the problem, and it sent the signal to would-be migrants around the world that America doesn't have the political will to enforce our borders. That's why we have to focus on enforcing our borders and fixing our immigration system to put American workers first.
So Joe Biden, you think, is going to have to cry uncle on these immigration policies because of facts on the ground within weeks, within months?
I think it'll probably be weeks. Again, we are approaching record levels of unaccompanied migrant children coming to our border. This is potentially going to be far beyond what it was in 2019 for Donald Trump or 2014 for Barack Obama. It is urgent that President Biden reverse some of his decisions and send the message that President Obama sent in 2014 by sending Secretary of State John Kerry, Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson to Central America saying, do not come to our country and think that you can be admitted.
Let's play a little Jeopardy. He wrote the most famous New York Times op-ed piece of all time.
Well, I don't want to be immodest, but only my op-ed piece caused the New York Times to have a complete and total meltdown in their newsroom and cost the jobs of at least 3 of their editors.
The correct answer, who is Tom Cotton? So that op-ed piece, obviously, you've made light of it, but you've also talked about the serious issues behind it. You wrote something that was your heartfelt opinion. You wrote something that was the expressed view of a majority of Americans at the time. Besides revisiting the history of it, besides talking about what a bad thing it was for the institution of the New York Times and freedom, what can be done about something like that? So United States senators who have points of view can express them and not have those kind of repercussions, because it wasn't just the people fired there. You became a villain on the left for writing an op-ed.
Yeah. Well, on the same day, I almost lost access to my Twitter account. I don't know if you know this, but I'd said, no quarter for insurrectionists. And some internet busybody says, Tom Cotton's advocating for war crimes against American citizens. When if you look up in the dictionary, no quarter as a colloquial term literally means deal with them harshly or don't show mercy to them. Look, as a United States Senator, no one's going to deplatform me. I can always go to the Senate floor. But senators of both parties should have the ability to express their opinions across a wide variety of platforms, to include Newsmax, and communicate with the American people. And it shouldn't matter if their opinions are a majority or a minority opinion. It's not really a question of who supports your opinion, as they did in my New York Times op-ed, or who doesn't. It's a question of whether we have freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of political debate. That's enshrined not just in our First Amendment, but in our Constitution itself under the so-called Speech and Debate Clause, in which congressmen and senators can't be held to account for what they say in a debate on the Senate floor or the House floor. That's how important our founders thought freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of debate was to our democracy.
CPAC is fun, but it's also a place for ideas. What's a big idea you have now that you wish was getting more attention on some issue that really isn't front and center?
Well, I'm particularly eager to talk about the minimum wage and E-Verify bill I just introduced with Mitt Romney this week. We have 3 other senators joined with us, Susan Collins, Shelley Moore Capito, and Rob Portman. I suspect we'll have more senators join us now that the $15 minimum wage bill is not going to be a part of Nancy Pelosi's big coronavirus spending blowout bill.
So your bill raises the federal minimum wage up to $10, is that right? Yeah. And then adds as a companion to that, talk about what the E-Verify does.
Yeah, so this is not just horse trading of let's give the Democrats something they want so we can get something we want. The employment verification system, the electronic system through which we verify a person's legal status to work in this country, is tightly connected to wage growth in America. So the $10 minimum wage would get wages up a little bit higher than they would have been if the last wage increase in 2009 had grown with the cost of living. So we'll give workers a pay raise, but we want to make sure that goes to American workers. And the way to do that is to require all employers across the country to use the E-Verify system. It is simple. It uses information that they already collect anyway. It has an almost spotless record of giving proper results. So we want to give America's workers higher wages.
And there's no reason, as far as you're concerned, why Democrats, given what's happened with their own attempts at $15, shouldn't be for this, right? I
don't think so. I mean, look, we're never going to get people like Bernie Sanders, who says the $15 an hour minimum wage is a compromise. But $10 an hour is a real increase since the 2009, even when you account for inflation. And Democrats have repeatedly voted to mandate the E-Verify system in immigration bills in the past. And again, this is not just horse trading of an idea we want and they want. This is tightly connected to making sure that we get higher wages for American workers.
Last question, Susan, we got to go. Who's more likely to be the Republicans' presidential nominee in 2024, Tom Cotton or Donald Trump?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about a race that's 4 years away.
3 years. 3 years.
3 years. I will say that that's going to be in the hands of Republican voters.
Tom Cotton answered honestly till the very end when he dodged, let the record show. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bob and Heather, back to you. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, I know. We're going to give him credit on that, not call it quite a dodge.
No. It was not a no.
He had the spirit there. Yeah. He will support whoever the candidate is, I'm sure.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark. We'll get back to you in a little bit. Now, another topic here, folks. Many Americans have been displeased with President Biden's foreign policy agenda as it opens the door to countries like China to act aggressively toward us. Our next guest wrote a new column on this topic titled Biden's Foreign Policy Invite Chinese Aggression. Joining us now to discuss his column is former chief economist for the U.S. International Trade Commission, Peter Morici. Peter, always a pleasure. Give us the lay of the land. What should we be aware of that the Biden administration is doing or not doing that puts us in jeopardy?
Well, I think that this over-reliance on multilateralism is not going to take us very far. I mean, our European allies have got enough problems at home, and they're not much interested in supporting us. That said, in Asia, there's real opportunities to create a framework for trade, bring back the Trans-Pacific Partnership and get the Americans involved, bring in the Indians, form stronger alliances, and confront the Chinese. If we don't do that, the Chinese will sooner or later cross the Straits of Taiwan, and we are ill prepared for that. The Biden administration comes in after having really just been out of office 4 years. These aren't newbies, okay? And they immediately have to do a 100-day review of trade policy and a 100-day review of
in Florida
defense
than even Donald Trump is. Could we see some new blood injected into the race, or do you think?
Thought through, we should be beefing up our Navy and developing very strong ties in the areas of trade and technology.